Trinity of God entered fully into human experience in Jesus of Nazareth, born of Mary, whose human father was Joseph. From his birth to early toddler, Jesus was surrounded by the sights and sounds of his tribe's ancestral home, Bethlehem. That is, before fleeing the terror of the Roman-secured king, Herod the Great. Jesus became the son, impoverished, now an illegal immigrant, to the sanctuary of ancient Egypt. Following Herod's death, Joseph and Mary brought their son to their familial home in Galilee, Nazareth, a small and poor village nestled above the glistening Sea of Tiberias, not 3 miles from the administrative capital of Herod Archelaus, son of the very one who tried to crush the toddler out. According to Scripture, at just the right time, because time matters, and at just the right place, because place is sacred, Jesus was born and lived out his life within the confines of danger, prejudice, and poverty, yet on the edge of Rome's power, aware of its beauty, theaters, and commerce. In such a time and in such a place, God, the eternal Son, Spirit, and Father, chose to taste fully our human story. And God is still breaking in. Pastor Bonnie, now take that phrase in. Pastor Bonnie was born on July the 9th, 1944, of the love of her parents, Anna Mae and Edward. Hers was a family that knew joy and broken spaces, impoverished at times, living simply always. The childhood home she remembered well was on Alaska Avenue Southwest near the Delridge Park and Community. Aware that hers was not a privileged station, Bonnie was grateful that God had given her the park just across the street, expansive, the stuff of a child's imagination and dreams of play. The earliest value impressed upon Bonnie's heart was from her own mother, and that was for the church. She spoke of her mom often in my presence in relation to her own vision and her own calling. Like Pastor Bonnie, Anna Mae was loyal, a faithful member of the West Seattle Church of the Nazarene. Now, WSCN's early life was interwoven with that of her mother and later Bonnie. Their own awareness of need in a nation of plenty, shaping this church's vision of mission as simply presence. Presence among the fears, the dreams, joys, and isolation of multiple generations growing up in the shadow of old and new High Point, the home of Native Americans, African Americans, Filipino, Samoan, Eritrean, Somali communities, their cultures and their familial focus. Bonnie understood better than most that Seattle was the world, and yet a world where very real gaps remain. There were the experiences developed early in life that allowed her to teach ESL, English as a second language, to migrants in transition, or bring into her home and Mel's home some 3,000 temporarily assigned and placed children in crisis via the Department of Social and Health Services, whether for 4 hours or 4 months. Being a newborn or a child escaping domestic violence at 17 years of age, a young woman or a man, deeply troubled, or just alone. Each found in Bonnie what we all at WSCN have found, a safe place. You see, time matters. Place matters. Bonnie, in the time that I had the privilege of calling her my friend, still do, confessor, and I have a sense because I've already done it, she will be, and colleague, aged from 17 to 17 and a half years of age. Then 17 and 5/8 and 17 and 3/4. Just ask her, and I suspect that Jesus himself will be afraid to challenge her own claim to time. Time did not appear to matter to her. Time did not appear. I think she was the Salmon in that. She was often referred to as being present at the time of Moses. Some wondered how far off that just might be. So, when about 20 years ago she came to me after some event and told me that God had called her to youth ministry, I smiled. I paused. I knew her real age. It was 70-ish. As a former and rather good youth minister myself, I smiled some more, and I paused some more. Until God made it abundantly clear to me that the Spirit was the prompting. WSCN has had 2 or 3 strong and good pastors and several that were disasters, and many between. When I sat with the district superintendent, he advised me that at times when the church was flourishing and times when it was down to less than 10 as it was at the time, Bonnie had always been there. He cautioned me that sometimes a strong layperson can be the problem or a great gift. To go slow with her before committing. Well, it became apparent to me soon that she was the emotive DNA of this church that held this place together. I risked with her and trusted never to be disappointed. Bonnie was this community's Moses. Which takes me back. As the tribes of Israel encamped at the foot of Mount Sinai, each afternoon at 3 p.m., the elders of each family tribe would gather their mothers, their daughters, and sons just outside the tent for the evening prayers. Then as Moses' shadow came into focus, each familial elder would stand, and with him the familial tribe in silence as he passed, making his way with his adjunct Joshua to the tent of meeting, where Moses would speak with God as one speaks to a friend. Then at the end of the hour of prayer, or 2 or 3, the ritual would repeat itself. This time, usually Joshua leading, sometimes he stayed, and Moses following, but this time Moses had a veil over his face so that the people would not die from the Shekinah glory of God now covering his face. That's what they understood. The Nazarene Church in West Seattle was born in the familial intimacy of a house church located on the corner, and the house is still there, Southwest Dawson and 50th Street Southwest. It was just the kind of communal knowing that gave rise to a lifelong friendship of 3 Hellion women known as the 3 Musketeers. That would be Bonnie, Marilyn, and Bonnie's younger sister, Mary. Now, to be sure, Bonnie was the angelic presence, I'm sure, that kept the other 2 Musketeers in check. That was for you, Sean. So much so, we had lunch with her the other day. She was just a treasure of good information. So much so that the extraordinary old age of 16, at that age, Bonnie, Mary at 13, and Marilyn at 10 went on a weekend trip alone to Vancouver, British Columbia. Imagine. Crossing, yeah. I suspect Bonnie's mom had actually looked at her age, and she was counting it in Bonnie years, not regular years. I have no other explanation why she would let them go. Yet the trust placed in Bonnie to keep this 13 and 10-year-old Musketeers on track was a harbinger of things to come. Bonnie and Marilyn began their friendship when WSCNC was meeting in a little white church on the northeast corner of 45th and Alaska, and then later at Turner Hall. It was here that one of her ministers impacted Bonnie's life deeply. Pastor Bassett Milton. He gave those teens, an incredible gift. Their home was open. They did not have children. And in those days, that would not have been welcome news. They adopted the kids. It became their home. The church was in a constant state of flux, seeking an ability to secure property and land, moving from Turner Hall, which is over here on California, to sharing a large and spacious building, Kenyon Hall, next to Westy Sports and Spirits. Now, evidently, having become accustomed to such a lively and homey atmosphere, the church's next stop was literally 3 city blocks from its current space, what is now The Bridge, a restaurant and sports bar. In the 1970s, this bar was home to serving spirits throughout the week, and on Sunday, the Spirit. Not a bad plan. Time and place matter. Bonnie's life mirrored that journey and has had her own moms before, rooted in the church, yet curious of what lay beyond. For Bonnie, what lay beyond would become extraordinary. Just before the arrival of another of her favorite pastors, Reverend Barney, and around the time of the purchase of this church, a little before, Bonnie, having graduated from West Seattle High, had her sights set on going to college at Northwest Nazarene College in Nampa, Idaho. I know why Idaho. I have no doubt that if she had, the study of religion would have eventually captured her heart, as it did 2 decades later. But that dream ran into 2 realities: money and love. Too little money available, but lots of love in the likes of a handsome young man who walked into our office one day, his generous and free spirit suggesting an alternative vision. They were a match in compassion, though very different in times and spaces that had formed them individually. Now, Mel wanted very little to do with the church in terms of its gathering for worship. It was not his gig. But if Bonnie needed labor for a workday or a truck to help move the next new pastor, like us, most of whom stayed someplace between 6 months and 3 months, 3 years rather, as the pastors, Mel was all in. If Bonnie wanted to be at church, he'd make sure she landed there. If Bonnie wanted to be near High Point, which was her own sense of missional presence, Mel would find a way to make that happen. From their love, God gave Mel and Bonnie 4 children: Ruth, Mel, Chris, together with Kevin, who tragically died shortly after birth. Bonnie and Mel chose to allow their children to decide between mom and dad on how they would spend their Sundays, each of them attempting to bribe the other for the adventure that only Sundays could bring. Their home was a continuous flow of compassion and chaos, finding loving space, taking up space. Now, it's hard to be a PK, a preacher's kid. Now, I know Ruth and Mel and you don't perceive yourself as a preacher's kid, but the truth of the matter is, between your 2 parents, you certainly had a home that was very much like a preacher's kid's home is. Their hearts, Bonnie and Mel's, and lives were each lost to a dream and passions that defined them, loving and delighting in their children, as I know they did, Bonnie often speaking of that. Nevertheless, they were often captured in the rush of moments whose demands would leave the kids little space as family, as children growing up, the center of a parent's attention, because the surprises and adventures of the life of compassion that they led are constant, as is the need for controlled space, away from the rush, a space you want to make as your own. If I may, I want to return to Moses for a second, Bonnie's friend. The New Testament gives us a snapshot of that moment when Moses would leave the tent of meeting and walk back through the thousands gathered. It's almost like the New Testament is making a joke of the originating event, reinterpreting it. Inside the Apostle Paul's letter telling us this way, we see Bonnie, I think, a little more clearly. To the church in Corinth, Paul writes this: "Now if the ministry that was engraved in letters of stone, the 10, came with glory so that the Israelites could not look steadily at the face of Moses," referring to when he left the tent of meeting, "because of its glory, transitory though it was," and here's the joke, "we are not like Moses, who would put a veil over his face to prevent the Israelites from seeing the end of what was passing away." In other words, like any good politician, Moses wanted his constituents to believe the glory, being with God, did not fade. This is what Paul says. "And if what was transitory came with glory, how much greater is the glory of that which lasts? Now the Lord is Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. And we all, who with unveiled faces contemplates the Lord's glory, are being changed, transformed into his image with ever increasing likeness, which comes from the Lord, who is the Spirit." On February 21, 2022, Bonnie's spirit ascended to God's face to face. Time matters. Space matters. What makes our times and the space we live in matter is doing the works of God. Bonnie was not driven by charisma, though there was charm that made everyone want to be in her presence. She was not colored in shades of red and pink. We've got a couple pictures of that, but generally yellow or green, but in earth tones of a life that knew both suffering and joy, disappointment and surprise. Bonnie was the meek of the earth that Jesus said shall inherit the earth, time and space. The combination of her integrity and the absolute unconditional acceptance of every other person is a rare gift. She was that treasure. Just to wrap, I later reported back to the district superintendent, who advised me, Terry, just be careful. And I said, no, you let me share. Bonnie is the glue that holds that place together. There's nothing in her to be afraid of. She's the DNA of love upon which that church flourishes. I miss her. We miss her. But with unveiled faces, lives lived authentically, we shall learn our lessons well. You can't please everyone. So you got to please Jesus, not the self. By living in time, by living in space, through the grace that is love, our time and space are made complete, safer, much richer by the way she lived hers.